Yeah, absolutely. Grateful to be on the run.
Homelessness, and I will ask our Vice Chair if he'll lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Hands over your hearts. Pledge allegiance to the
Flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So once again, welcome everybody. I know normally this room is really cold. Do you guys feel it less cold? Yes. I think it's kind of comfortable, right? I see shawls that are not on yet, blankets aren't on yet, so I think we're doing good. So I'll try not to mess things up. I know, we're not ready for this like comfortable temperature. Anyways, the agenda for today contains a brief description of each item to be considered. Except as provided by law, no action shall be taken on any item not appearing on the agenda. The Commission to End Homelessness encourages public participation. If you wish to speak on any item appearing on the agenda or during general public comments, please complete a speaker request form and turn it in to the clerk prior to reading of the item. Speakers will be given up to 3 minutes to speak. The clerk will run the timer and announce when your time is up. The public may comment. Our public comments may also be submitted electronically by emailing response@ocgov.com. And with that, we'll move to roll call. So, Madam Clerk, will you please call roll?
Thank you. Commissioners, please indicate your presence when I call your name. Commissioner Sarmiento.
Here.
Commissioner Wagner.
Here.
Commissioner Vanderpool. Commissioner Kim. Commissioner Rose. Commissioner Parks. Here. Commissioner Hawley. Commissioner Dimitropoulos. Commissioner Bustamante Pixa. Here. Commissioner Hurst.
Here.
Commissioner Twan.
Here.
Commissioner Davis. Here. Commissioner Ivins. Here. Commissioner Spitzer. Here. Commissioner Cunningham. Here. Commissioner Afable. Here. Commissioner Wyatt. Here. Commissioner Peineman. Commissioner Bruno Nelson. Here. Commissioner Rios Faust. Here. And Commissioner Morse. Here. Thank you, Chairman. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. As a reminder, please be aware that the room is hot mic'd for the live streaming of the meeting, so additional microphones are placed on the table in front of you. Commissioners, please speak into the microphones so it may be picked up for your comment for the live stream. Please try to keep any side conversations to a minimum as they may be picked up by the microphones throughout the room. So at this time, we will take public comment from any members of the public wishing to speak on any non-agenda topics that are under the subject matter jurisdiction of this commission. Madam Clerk, do we have any requests to speak?
We have not received any requests to speak under general public comments.
Great, thank you. So now we will move to the agenda items for today's meeting, and we'll begin with our discussion items. Madam Clerk, will you please read the first item?
Yes, item 1 is the Office of Care Coordination update, which includes updates on the bylaw ad hoc, the 2025 survey, and the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness Federal Homelessness Prevention Framework. We have no requests from the public to speak on this item.
Great, thank you. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Doug to give us an update for today.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for everyone being here. And as you all might recall, this is an adjusted date, October 2nd. Usually we meet a little later in the month, so I appreciate everybody accommodating the schedule change. So I have a few updates here. First, I'd like to provide a brief update on our bylaws ad hoc. It was established, as many of you know, in our June meeting, focused on reviewing our bylaws, and an exercise that really hasn't been done since 2018. The group has now met twice and are currently reviewing a red line draft that incorporates edits discussed in the first 2 meetings. There's been a real focus on looking at the wording of the mission and purpose, which impacts decisions on the rest of the bylaws. Ultimately, we anticipate that the ad hoc will bring its recommendations back to our December meeting. Another sort of update on the quicker side. Our office is working closely with CityNet and Hub for Urban Initiative to establish the methodology and fundamental framework of the 2025 survey, which is going to focus on getting a better understanding of folks who have become homeless in the last year. As many of you recall, this is really based on results we saw in the 2024 point-in-time count, where 48.33% of folks, essentially half of the folks surveyed, stated that they experienced homelessness for the first time in their life in the last 12 months. We anticipate significant progress in finalizing the survey and finalizing operations around collecting the data. We anticipate data being collected in the first couple of months of 2025. With that said, over the next month, really the next 2 months, we anticipate coming back to the commissioners, the COC board, and the Lived Advisory Committee of the COC for assistance and sort of technical expertise in ensuring that we create the most effective survey and that we operationalize it in an effective manner. So more to come. Yet again, another update that's really more to come in December. And then lastly, we wanted to make sure, as we've done previously, to bring to the Commission's attention important reports, frameworks, surveys to the Commission when they directly impact the work that we do here at the Commission. So the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness published a framework that's in the packet for each of the Commission members. That's essentially a framework for building or sustaining a homelessness prevention system in one's community. What I'll note is that the framework does what I believe to be a really good job breaking down really breaking down a prevention system based on the spectrum of programs related to prevention, whether it's an individual that is immediately facing eviction or thinking about some of the more universal supports. And what's great about the report is that it does a really clear job of helping communities understand how to structure not only what a framework would look like, but it also speaks about the importance of utilizing existing resources and also, I think, does a good job of emphasizing that each household has unique needs, and many households need a sort of soft touch. Not every component of your prevention system should be this overbearing, incredibly expensive exercise. So I encourage folks to review this framework. I imagine we'll be coming back knowing that prevention is such a strong focus of this commission. It's one of our 4 pillars that in the future we very well may be coming back to this commission to look more directly at this report, possibly bring some of the folks that created this report to the commission as we talk more further about our prevention framework. And with that being said, that concludes the updates from the Office of Care Coordination.
Great, thanks, Doug. Any questions or comments on the items? Yes, Commissioner White.
I have a couple thoughts on the different topics. One on the survey, as we look at how to implement that. I think we actually have some organizations in place that may be able to conduct that survey and gather more and maybe more accurate data we look to utilize. First of all, we have the outreach teams who often have by names list and try to meet with people that they're aware of in their community quite frequently. And if they, in terms of that, if we provided them a survey, an opportunity to go, one, it's always useful for them to meet with the people and talk through, their situation with them, and two, together they could gather data from those groups, and we would get sort of a win-win. We would get the data we're looking for and have an opportunity to meet and try to encourage those people to work as we work through. Secondly, we have our shelters, and the people checking in there and the staff that works with the people in those shelters also can take the opportunity to survey those in the shelters as they're working with them and just sort of gather data so they have a better understanding of that situation. And thirdly, we have the 211OC team who takes calls in for people looking for housing. And again, if they had the opportunity to prevent surveys to those who are homeless and looking. So I think we have 3 different groups of people who could gather a lot of data in a very methodical way. I think we could cover more bases at a lot lower cost and a lot more effectiveness if we considered that as a way to survey and put it in place so that we could repeat this survey ongoing and gather that data and make it an ongoing part of what we collect as we first encounter those on the streets, or we get them into the shelter, or we get a call in 211, so that that data, as it's useful, is collected ongoing. And I think that data is very valuable. So I think the idea that we could set up a method of collecting it ongoing would be something we should look into. I think it's worth considering as we look at that. Second comment, the framework for prevention. As you've sat around this table with me for a few years now, I keep talking prevention is my sort of favorite topic to talk about. I would like to recommend that we put together out of this commission an ad hoc group to analyze that survey and come back to this commission and possibly to then advice to the supervisors about how we could address the things in this framework and really use this framework to build on as a county and put some programs together. And I think it is a good source of data, a starting point for us to bring some recommendations back to the Board of Supervisors, which really is our charter here. And I think an ad hoc group to start analyzing this and discussing it would be useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wyatt. So any response, Doug?
On the survey front, I appreciate what Paul's mentioned. I think all 3 of those groups are always valuable in collecting surveys. A couple of things. CityNet is our project lead. That doesn't mean that they're going to conduct everything soup to nuts. I'd imagine, as we've done previously, obviously in our point in time counts and in the 2023 survey, we're going to be leaning on different groups like Outreach and 211 and things to that nature to assist us. Before we're able to give really concrete answers on that, we're still early on figuring out exactly what the survey is going to look like, who we're going to survey and things to that nature. But no, I concur.
Thank you. Commissioner Peineman?
Thank you, sir. Yes, regarding item 1B, the 2020-25 survey, my understanding is that this is the survey that's alternating from the one that's required by HUD every other year. This is the one that Orange County is choosing to put into place to help us with collecting better data that isn't constrained by the limits of the HUD mandated point in time count. And so, first I want to mention that how fantastic the first one you did 2 years ago was, how very valuable that was, and just especially a lot of warmth for the work that will go into kind of continuing that this next year. I think it was a really fantastic survey. And the reason I wanted to pause to comment about this is just to mention, I'm just thinking about the August 2023 presentation on the Benioff Homeless and Housing Institute study regarding pathways to homelessness. And it really struck me, it was one of the few times in my career I've seen data that really looked at exits into homelessness that was not focused more on the head of household, the renter, the lessee-lessor relationship, but not in the framework of tenant-landlord relationship, but in terms of people subleasing and so forth. And so I just want to put out the thought that, and I know it's tricky, only so many questions you can ask in a survey before it doesn't work as well, but if there's a chance to think about ways to frame questions concerning folks, people who are homeless and who are outreach to as part of the survey process who are not the tenant directly. And I say that Orange County, I think, compared to most counties that are in larger high-cost areas, has much larger percentage of rental units that are multiple bedrooms. So odds are we'll see a larger component or cohort of people that are subleasing, and so that's why I take time to say that. So anyway, I'm just excited to see that's coming again. It was very successful, very high-quality survey 2 years ago.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you, both of you, for those comments. I think they're well received. So we'll go ahead and move along to today's presentation. And Madam Clerk, will you go ahead and read the next item?
Yes, item 2 on the agenda is a presentation titled Small Scale Housing Units, presented by Doug Becht, the Director of Office of Care Coordination, and we have no requests from the public to speak on this item.
Great, thank you, Madam Clerk. So before I turn it over to Doug, I just wanted to maybe frame a couple of the items that Doug's going to be going into in much more detail, but also take a moment just to thank the members of the ad hoc who lent their time. To Directors Cunningham, Morse, Bruno, Nelson, Peineman, and Davis, thank you all for spending the time, because this was formed, I believe, last October. So we're close to, spending a year on this topic, and I want to thank our former Chair, Commissioner Wagner, for putting this ad hoc together. And it was in response, in essence, I remember it being one of the first meetings I know I attended, and I know Commissioner Spitzer was talking about the expense, really the high cost of having to produce these units and how difficult it is. And again, the delay that we're looking at and how we're trying to scale up, but sometimes, cost and turnaround time really gets extended. So it got us thinking about what we called tiny homes and seeing another piece of this continuum of housing. And I think that the ad hoc also has some recommendations on maybe changing that name to small scale housing. So kudos to the ad hoc for that, because tiny homes just didn't seem to give it the weight that we should, and the seriousness that it has. But in the 2022 housing funding strategy showed that the cost per unit to construct a new unit was about $345,000. That spiked to $550,000 in 2022, and I'm sure that's even higher now. So we're probably hovering right around the $700,000 per unit number. But really, the idea behind the small-scale housing effort is to understand that this isn't meant to supplant or to not consider permanent supportive housing any longer. It's actually to be in tandem with it and to work as a complement, because we know that it takes a very long time to develop these permanent supportive housing units, these traditional brick and mortar units. But there is an industry now for these smaller scale homes that can, stand them up a lot quicker, a lot less expensive. So maybe that's part of our continuum, because what we have been seeing is a backlog at our shelters where there are people ready to transition out. And so when we were speaking about the survey, and Paul and Milo were referencing it, one of the things that I think our point in time count and our own surveys showed is that 72% of our folks in shelters are ready to transition out. So they've done everything that's expected of them. They've been there now, for quite a while. So we are trying to find a place for them to transition to from the shelters, because shelters, as we know, shouldn't be a permanent placement, but it should be a very transitory, a temporary placement just to get them ready for permanent supportive housing. So what we're seeing is that only 1 out of 12 folks who were eligible to transition out have been successful. So we know that there's a bottleneck at the shelters. What we saw when we were looking at the data recently for our Garden Grove street medicine program, and Commissioner Kim will know this as well, because when we were talking about the success of it, we're also trying to place folks during that street medicine effort. And we're seeing that we were only able to connect 4% of the folks in Garden Grove that were receiving medical services from our street medicine program at Cal Optima. And so we see that there is this backlog, and we complement that with some of the findings of the survey that we did here internally, and it showed that a lot of people who were asked whether or not they want to go into congregate shelters, one of the first responses is that they don't feel comfortable being in a congregate space because their safety, they believe, could be breached. They don't have privacy. They don't have that, that comfort level to, especially, some of our folks who are unhoused who have children and who are seniors. So they are especially, averse to, to coming into congregate shelters. So we know that we have to provide some options, but right now the only other option that we have is permanent supportive housing, and we know that that is, that takes time. This really was a way for the ad hoc to take a deep dive. I know multiple visits were made to different sites, not only to some of the campuses that have the small-scale homes, but also to the manufacturers where there's a burgeoning industry. So I think all those things, I think, were important for the ad hoc to understand, to bring back to the full board, so we all can understand what does this look like as an option. And, you know, the way I see it is that it's one more alternative in the palette of options that we have in the portfolio that we have of housing that we can create for our folks who are going through these conditions, and how do we transition them safely and provide an option to people who aren't really prepared and aren't really, don't feel safe about being in congregate spaces. With that, I just wanted to say thank you also to Doug and his team, because I know multiple field trips were taken, a lot of deep discussion, spoke to people who were subject matter experts in this. And so it's funny, I was on a trip to Italy to go visit my daughter, and I visited with a friend who has a manufacturing plant for these small-scale homes, but they use it more for triage in hospitals in places that are war-torn. So they sent a lot to Africa. A lot were used in the Middle East, but that's what they're using their small-scale homes for, which is more triage and medical care. But it's the same concept. They can stand them up, they send them, they're already prefabricated at a very low cost. So that seems to be where things are going globally, on just making sure spaces, a roof over somebody's head is made available. And it's really just one more tool in our tool belt that we can have accessible to us. So hopefully some of the ad hoc members will go ahead and jump in. I'm sure Doug won't be offended if you all just, see a slide that you feel passionate about. Feel free to go ahead and lend your comments, but let me turn it over to Doug so he can go ahead and walk us through the presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. So I want to emphasize as well the appreciation for the ad hoc members. This has been an ad hoc that's lived a little longer than most ad hocs over the last really entire portion of this year. And as the chairman mentioned, and we'll get into it, we did a lot of visits. So this was a time intensive exercise. I think everyone, I don't want to speak for everyone on the ad hoc, but I know that myself and my team really enjoyed this as an exercise, something that we went into, we leave the exercise knowing a lot more about small-scale housing units than when we entered. And it really felt like the time, especially with the visits and the interviews, were well spent, and we were able to gain new insight with each person we spoke with. So I'm going to walk through the ad hocs report. I want to be really clear about that. And I'll pause throughout the report for ad hoc members to sort of jump in, provide their insight, perspective, or any thoughts or anything I'm missing. Feel free to jump in at any time. I think this whole group's well aware of my ability to drone on for a while. So, feel free to jump in. So let's see. Just for a really brief background, there we go. The ad hoc was established last year in October 2023's commission meeting to really evaluate alternative housing solutions, including studying, defining, and identifying potential applications for tiny homes. Really from the beginning, the ad hoc explored the term tiny home and the different models that fall under that umbrella term. And the group met with developers, programs, subject matter experts, and those with lived experience, with the goal of really formulating a shared understanding of the definition around tiny homes. Through, as the chairman mentioned, through this exercise and process, the ad hoc deemed that the term small-scale housing unit was a more appropriate fit to describe these structures. So that's why, obviously you're hearing us shift to that small-scale housing unit term. Throughout the exercise, the ad hoc viewed each model, viewed the preparation for each interview, set all the questions, listened to our feedback, really through a lens that incorporated the guiding principles and best practices outlined in the commissioner's pillars report that we have here in front of us. Really understanding the exercise and work around the importance of those guiding principles and best practices, and seeing how they were either applicable or were not applicable to small-scale housing units. And obviously, the two pillars that were most involved in this were shelter and housing. So, as we mentioned before, this was a busy ad hoc, and I believe that the report represents that. Through the spring and early summer, the ad hoc visited 7 different sites across Southern California, conducted an additional 6 different interviews. The group also met with colleagues from Santa Cruz who operate a small-scale housing shelter in what was previously the parking lot of a congregate shelter. There was a lot of interesting insight from that group. The ad hoc also met with the COC's Lived Experience Advisory Committee to get perspective from folks with lived experience and lived expertise. All these groups and visits were really instrumental in shaping the report that we're presenting here today. So as we get started, and this is one of the areas where I'll pause, but I'll walk through just to give everyone a little bit of perspective of where the group went and what the group saw. So here's a picture of a host of the different models that were seen. And I know that the picture's a little small, but bear with us here. If we're starting out on the left, top left, and going clockwise around, the first 2 pictures are essentially, one is a shelter, a pallet shelter called Esperanza Village in Baldwin Park in LA County, where it's a emergency shelter where individuals get, each of them get a pallet structure, which is the group that makes these particular units. Next to it, you're going to see the same company, the same developer, but a shelter in the city of Torrance. So it's really interesting to hear how the same model is being used in 2 separate applications. The city of Torrance visit was really, I think, interesting, and where it was unique, at least for us, was this was the one visit where the local jurisdiction, the city, really guided us through their tour and talked about the process of, from the city or the local government's perspective, how they got there, what were some of the hurdles, what were some of the advantages and disadvantages. Next to the third picture over is a picture of Boss Cube's product, Boss Cube's being one of the developers in Serenity Homes, which is a family shelter in Baldwin Park as well. As you can see, in this picture, the structure looks a little bit more permanent. It's essentially, I believe it was somewhere around 140 or 120 square feet, and each family received, there was one family per unit, and as we move forward, this is some of the details I'll let the ad hoc fill in at some of these places. The picture all the way on the right is of Limb Living. So we went to a factory for Limb Living in Anaheim. They have since actually gone out of business, which is unfortunate, and we'll sort of, as we go through the report, speak a little bit more to the industry at the moment. But their structures, as you can see here, they were shooting for more of a permanent housing setting. We all walked away really impressed with their product. It had a bathroom in it, a kitchen. It looked very much like a newly constructed home that you would see in any development, but just on a smaller scale. As we continue to go around clockwise, at the bottom there is, what are my buddy, remind me which group this is, Life Arc. Our buddies at Life Arc, which essentially the site that they have in El Monte is a permanent supportive housing site that folks are currently living in. And essentially, they have a unique technology that builds the housing unit in sort of one piece. They have this specific plastic, and I know I'm probably underselling their product, but or underselling the complexity of their project. But essentially, they build cubes that you could piece together to make a really nice housing product. In the middle there on the bottom is a picture of Simon Builders unit. The Simon Builders working with Anaheim Union High School students that are building a tiny home, a small-scale housing unit, as part of a school project over the course of years. And then lastly, on the left, bottom left there is Continents, who they were the first group we interviewed, and then we ended up visiting them in Long Beach. They essentially have as what you could see here, is a collapsible unit. That one of the things that they really pushed when sort of selling their product was that it could pop up within less than 5 minutes. Sort of like what the chairman mentioned in his experience in Italy, this group has used their products more in a variety of different applications. They mentioned schools and hospitals in Africa. They had supplied units to Maui after the wildfires in Maui. They spoke about providing these units in a remote area where there was like a ski event, a professional ski event where lodging was far away and they needed lodging for a few nights. And, they had yet to sort of dabble in utilizing their product for what we were discussing. So with that, I'll sort of open it up to the ad hoc members. I know there's a lot of different thoughts.
Doug, if you could remind me, the pallet shelter, what was the square footage of that?
Somewhere around like 70 or 80
74, was it?
Yeah, it was like 64.
Most of the folks in this room have a closet bigger than that.
Mm-hmm.
I spoke to residents at both locations about it. One of them was his last day there. It was, because it was transitional, he was transitioning to permanent supportive. The other one, the other person I spoke to was extremely happy living in this closet. She, by all evidence that I could see, had mental health problems, and she knows she would not have survived on the street, and probably with her mental health would not have done well in a congregate setting either. I think the interesting deal on the pallet shelters in Torrance was the location. They put it at City Hall. It is right next to City Hall. You guys have some room around here? Build a parking structure instead of a lot? Have a little tiny home village here.
Commissioner.
Thank you. I would like to say thank you to staff. First of all, it was a lot to coordinate all of us to try to get us on site tours that were not even in Orange County. There were some in LA. We did a lot of Zooms, we did a lot of meetings, and the staff did a really good job trying to get us to see as much product as possible. I was also up at the Torrance tour with Commissioner Morris, and it was very interesting to see what the city had to say about how it really changed their residents' perspective They were worried that they were going to put this tiny scale community on City Hall property, but that it's really helped people understand the importance of giving people shelter as opposed to putting them in a communal setting. It makes them feel more dignified. They are, I think, ready to wait for permanent supportive housing. As a developer and a builder, it takes years and sometimes a decade or more of supportive housing that we're building here in the city of Santa Ana. So I really liked a lot of the product. I would encourage anyone that wants to see some of this to look it up on their own online. There's a lot of videos that you can see, and it was good to see and talk to some of the residents there to really understand that they were actually happy for 64 square feet, and it's better than living in a room with a lot of different personalities. So thank you.
Thank you. So I also wanted to thank staff because I know it was a lot of work to coordinate all of this and help us answer questions and get us, you know, it was literally like herding cats to get us all in all of these different locations. So I appreciate that. There's just a couple points that, takeaways that I had. One was that it was really clear that the collaboration and the partnership of who actually developed the units, whether it was a pop-up or it was this school project in Anaheim, and the quality, right? Like that's really important. But also who is actually going to manage the facilities once they're in operation. And then the type. So if we were going to do something like this in Orange County, it's got to be really clear. We have to be really clear about what type of model we want to adopt, who we're actually going to house in each of the units, and the time frame that folks are going to actually stay in those units. Because, I've spent 10 years, and most of that time in ending homelessness, my work was in Skid Row. And anyone that is, lived on the street will tell you that they want some kind of shelter, right? Like anything's better than living in a tent. So they will be happy, but like, for example, the pillar, the pallet units, those are great, but they're not operable for long-term use. So I think, it's great for getting someone off the street temporarily and, no more than 90 to 120 days, but we really have to think about what's going to happen. So these are all wonderful models. I think that, they're really great. So for example, our Life Arc was really great to see the communal space. It's great for permanent supportive housing because they actually created not just the units, but a community space where folks had a shared kitchen and they were actually, having life skills training and cooking classes and things like that. So I think it was really important to have that, especially if they're going to be a long living situation. So I just wanted to add that because I think, it was really phenomenal to see the creativity and what really goes into these properties. So I just wanted to share that.
I think I want to just open, this is Milo, with emphasizing what a great job staff did in really administering a great opportunity to, in a structured, a methodical way, look at different building methodologies and infills techniques and these tiny home or small scale unit models and how they might be practically applied and added to the tool belt of resources here in Orange County. I think for me, in one sense, I'd just say these all seem to work. They're different quality of housing and so forth, but they seem to work. Most of what we looked at was transitional. I call it transitional as opposed to, say, emergency or permanent. But we definitely saw all of the above. And I think a couple notes. I think one is they generally did appear to have a pretty high placement rate into housing. In talking to the staff there at the different locations, who were pretty open and frank about the challenges. They had different referral mechanisms into them, which is something to think about. I think the county here does a great job of thinking about what are the best referral mechanisms to make use of the resources that are available. And so I think that was pretty material. And and a lot of variety in different layouts. Some had restrooms in the units, some did not. Some had no common space that was indoor, some not. And so just thinking through and I guess there's a great opportunity, I think, in this, and thinking about there's a customizable application perhaps for a lot of jurisdictions here in the county when they're looking to try and solve problems specifically in their areas. And each of these jurisdictions had different sites with different opportunities that they were using these new technologies for. And I think what I like about this, my nonprofit's done some small infill housing. We've done a 3-unit infill development project that opened in 2018. We did a 16-unit shipping container project, other modular, and we've also operated some of the non-congregate shelter programs that have been out around the last few years through the offices of the Home Key program. And so that's probably why I was on this ad hoc committee. And I think one of the challenges we have is we measure success in ending homelessness in numbers, people served, units built, and that's a good measure, but these are human beings and we have to meet them where they're at. And so I really love the opportunity to have smaller scale infill pushed for and brought into, again, more into the toolkit, and not just think in terms of unit count. And there's really no industry that I think is more difficult to innovate in than construction, which is why we're still building homes like my great-great-grandparents in Germany did, because they look the same and have the same framing and everything. It takes major efforts to make decent gains in speed, and I think cost is almost impossible to get to. Just you're trying to tread water with costs. And so it's no measure of surprise that we rely on larger projects, and many developers and jurisdictions look to get more units because that's the best way to do it, and you get cost efficacy with scale. So to me, it was quite remarkable. I'll just say surprise is the word I experienced, that we saw a range of these emergency products with these emerging companies, these smaller scale infab products that were quite viable, and I was quite surprised at what I came across in these site visits. And so I would just say I think this is something to definitely push forward in some way, and to see if we can think about how in the different cities and jurisdictions we can take these smaller infill housing products and how they might fit into the needs in the communities. I am blown away. I think in my mind this started off as a permanent housing conversation, which I think it should be, but how much non-congregate shelter opportunities in the county in the last couple of years have really opened up the door to supporting higher acuity populations. And I think these are really well suited for that and with getting good results. So anyway, I just was very impressed by this, and I just wanted to just loop back and just say thank you for the opportunity to be on this ad hoc, and really highly impressed with what staff did to support this process and really bringing back practical awareness about how this might look if it were reapplied here in the county.
Yeah, and I'll keep going, please.
Last but not least, right?
Yeah.
First, I also would like to thank the staff. I think this was a great process, and I'm really impressed with the report. And not to repeat what's already been said, but want to echo a little bit of what Commissioner Davis said earlier. Keeping in mind who we're serving and what we're trying to accomplish with the product is, I think, needs to be at the center of our decision. We have a shelter system now that is serving folks for much longer than what it was intended to do when it was built. And so we see folks that are there that are living in spaces that where they were intended to live in for a week, that they're forced to live in for months and months. That's not, it's not what we would want to see. So when we look at how we're going to move forward with this, I think we need to put at the center of it who we're intending to serve and for how long we're intending to serve them. If we're intending to serve families, this would look different than if we're intending to serve individuals. If we're intending to serve folks for 90 days, it looks different than if we're intending to serve folks for 9 months. And so that should be at the center of what we build, because as other commissioners have said, they all could work, but they all could also not work if we use them for the wrong population or for the wrong period of time.
Yeah, so I appreciate all of that, and I think it does a really good job of sort of laying the landscape of the report that I'm going to work through, and then pass it back to the group for a more rich discussion. Let's see. clicker to work. Yeah, go see. So, all right, as we get the slides to advance, I'll just get us started. So I really want to walk through, because there's so many components, as the commissioners mentioned, that that the ad hoc heard needs to be considered when considering a site. So and as we sort of start off in thinking about the development themselves, so the small scale, there we go. Small scale housing market is really a niche space of construction, and zoning we saw can, as we know, vary by city and county by county. The degree of the site preparation per model really varied. Some units could be set directly on level solid surface, whether it's concrete or asphalt, whereas others required a lift foundation to accommodate utility hookups. And setup preparation can be done by developers generally, but often required additional fees. Units can be tied into permanent utilities, or utilities will be required, or utilities can be shipped in through temporary basis, whether it's through trailers or other natures. And what we saw as well is that when it comes to utilities, as we all know, they also will require more ongoing maintenance. So some units also came with adaptable solar power. So it really, even just in the world of utilities and hookups and to infrastructure, each unit varied so greatly, and with that variation, obviously came a cost variation. The length of delivery and setup varied widely as well. Some units came pre-assembled, others required several days or weeks to build, which I know overall, when we're talking days and weeks, compared to traditional permanent housing, that's really more months, if not years, that's obviously an advantage. The other thing that the ad hoc noted was the prep time to get the unit to the site. So it might be able to be constructed when it's all on the site within a couple of minutes or a couple of days, but the developer getting it to the site might also take weeks and months. Most developers were willing to modify their units to suit various purposes, whether it's a one-bedroom, an ensuite bathroom, a kitchenette, ADU, make their units ADU compliant. The fire rating of units can vary by developer and obviously by zoning within each jurisdiction. So that also had an impact on, as we saw with the two examples of the pallet homes, one in Baldwin Park was set, I believe, 8 feet away from each other, and the one in Torrance was much closer. So obviously, the closer they are, the more you could put on a particular lot. And then operators noted that there should be a budget considered for ongoing maintenance, such as cleaning and repairs of the unit. So as mentioned before, all of these developers, there were plenty of developers. They all had unique products. They all were interesting. Many of them stated that there was a guaranteed life cycle to their product, but none of them had been have been operating for that life cycle. So these were all, I'm sure the rating was accurate, but what the group noted was, with such a new market, there's obviously more to be learned. When you, so when we're looking at program and operations, the sites demonstrated the clear value of non-congregate shelter. Specifically, it was noted before, but one specific example that stands out is when we spoke to our colleagues up in Santa Cruz that had that pallet homes in essentially their parking lot of their congregate shelter. What the gentleman noted was that when there's an opening in his congregate shelter, the building that has all the utilities, the facilities, dining hall, all sort of the infrastructure. When there was an opening there, people still preferred to go into the much rougher pallet home out in the parking lot because of the interest of privacy and security. So it was really, at least for me, sort of hit home that, he started out by describing the pallet home that he received as not having electricity connected to it. The state had provided it to him and sort of required them to roll these out. And essentially it was what many of us would envision when we call a tough shed. And then when he came back, he was like, when people have the ability to choose whether to go into the traditional shelter or our tough sheds in the parking lot, 9 out of 10 times people still pick the tough sheds. So I thought really interesting there. A lot of emphasis was placed, as one might imagine, on the importance of a common space, in a community. Operators stressed the importance of understanding the perceptions of the impact of small-scale housing units sites from surrounding communities, and like with any exercise, really ensuring that support, a big pillar of preparation was getting support from the communities. As been mentioned before, really important when thinking about the spectrum of small-scale housing units, they really, through the visits, really saw a variety of applications from emergency shelter to transitional shelter all the way to permanent supportive housing.
I got a quick
Yeah,
comment.
please.
So I think I want to loop back to on the program on operations when you mentioned the concerns about the neighbors' perception. I remember talking at length with each of them about this, but I just want to just be clear. This was their concerns getting it approved or set up on the front end of it, but I didn't hear them describing issues on an ongoing basis. In fact, specifically, Torrance was describing how none of the concerns that were raised during the process manifested. And so I just want to note that we didn't hear from any of the walkthroughs any issues with neighbors at all. It was all about just getting it approved and the narrative in supporting buy-in from your neighbors. And I think, so I just want to just kind of put that out there.
Thank you, Milo. So as the group looked at the advantages seen during this small-scale housing exercise, first is that initial affordability, the upfront cost that has been discussed here in the commission several times. We saw the upfront cost of a small-scale housing unit is generally less expensive than the brick-and-mortar counterpart. The models reviewed by the ad hoc ranged in price per unit depending on the scale, features, and reassembly or assembly required to get the unit up. The speed of construction, although the construction times vary between developers, like I mentioned before, as previously mentioned in the slide, we're talking days and weeks compared to months and years. Customization and design, the various models were shown to be have the ability to be designed to meet the specific needs of whatever occupants were going to be occupying the space, including accessibility features for individuals with disabilities or families. Flexibility and scalability. The small-scale housing units we saw could be developed in various configurations, including individual units or a connected dormitory. The flexibility allows for scalable solutions which can be adapted to different community needs and available spaces. So when we were at Life Arc, which was the group in El Monte, they were showing us renderings of a shelter that they were in the process of building in LA County that utilized two very small parking lots that were across the street from each other. And it really reminded me, really showed the way that small-scale housing units with the appropriate models can really fit, if you have the right model and you have the right space, can really fit unique spaces and provide, a resource in a space that traditionally would not be considered viable.
Yes.
Are you going to give us the costs? You didn't give us a number.
You got to wait a little bit. And I think that's an important discussion. We know that, yes.
DA's gonna,
Michelle, you're not sharing this with me.
no,
Yeah,
DA's gonna
yeah.
pay for it. I was just telling Doug,
Yeah, yeah.
DA's offered to pay for it.
And that's
so
why he's
that's what he wants
asking.
to know.
I think that's going to be part of the discussion. We knew as a commission that that was really the one, if not the biggest question that this commission was asking on this particular ad hoc. So we'll get to that. I promise. So the challenges. Speaking of challenges here. So the challenges were limited space. The small scale housing units have limited space for living and storage, which could be challenging through a lot of applications, especially when it comes to larger families, people with medical needs, anybody with some type of significant belongings. And also, what we heard from many folks, including the Lived Experience Advisory Committee, was the smaller spaces also impacting people with a history of trauma in a more detrimental way. Zoning, the zoning of tiny homes really can vary by county and city. Navigating through these regulatory barriers shown themselves to really hinder and make it difficult for ability to acquire land and any potential project for specific potential projects. Connections to permanent infrastructure. While developers offer connections to utility services, existing infrastructure must be on site to make the connection. Building out utilities such as water, sewage, and electricity in areas where they were not previously existing could be costly, and we saw it to be costly and logistically complex. So as we talk about price, this is where, as we get to, what Commissioner Spitz is eager to get to, you see some of the challenges in getting to a dollar-for-dollar comparison, but I'll keep going. Maintenance and upkeep. The upkeep to ensure some of these smaller scale housing units remain in good condition required ongoing support and maintenance. And in some cases, we saw efforts that arguably would exceed or require more effort than traditional shelters or permanent housing. And then I think incredibly important is the operational cost. The cost of development in some areas were more affordable, but such an important cost, and I know many jurisdictions who help fund shelters know that that operational cost is so important. There's still a need for services and ongoing operational expenses. Similar to existing housing models, the expense to operate a small-scale housing unit campus encompasses a range of programs, services that are necessary to maintain support for the needs of the residents. And additionally, when we think about considerations, the importance of that supportive services was one that the ad hoc really wanted to ensure was pointed out, that existing small house campuses offer supportive services to residents to ensure wraparound care. Yet again, those services are a big part of that operational budget. The length of stay, and this was mentioned before, when really considering what particular model a group might be interested in, it's so incredibly important to ensure that there's an understanding for how long someone is expected to occupy their unit, not just for traditional wear and tear, but really to ensure that the unit is set up. If it's someone who's going to occupy the unit for 9 months, 12 months, several years, naturally you would want to ensure that there's the appropriate bathroom, kitchenette, heating, certain specific infrastructure and expectations that you'd have in a permanent supportive housing or a permanent housing option compared to what we saw on the other end of it, the emergency shelter, the pallet homes that were really just a structure that had a bed and some really light electrical hookups and a door. And then lastly, the group really wanted to emphasize the importance of space utilization. The design of the layout of a small-scale housing unit and can really have an effect in the capacity and functionality. The maximum space and utility considered for fire code, privacy, accessibility for those with disability and common areas needs to be thoughtful. Community engagement, as we mentioned before, ensuring that communities are appropriately engaged, and then supportive of a property. The cost management, the ongoing operations cost of running a small-scale housing unit campus can be extensive. This is because of the program and the services offered may need to be more comprehensive. Additionally, the cost of extra security is something that should be, that is often considered. And then, ongoing funding, as we see the state and federal government funding may be limited in small-scale housing units. State funding's limited, and although there's federal funding for permanent supportive housing, vouchers, when thinking about that rental subsidy, are limited and in short supply as well. So what that gets us to is the ad hoc's recommendations. I guess I'll pause here to maybe discuss the question at hand.
Yeah. Thank you, Doug. And let me go ahead and call on Commissioner Spitzer because he had a question. And then if there's, because that's on obviously everybody's mind. We know it's probably not the same cost to construct a permanent supportive housing unit. And it could be 0 to, 700,000, depending on how much or how large, the unit, the flexibility, I guess, is something I think that was mentioned. But let's hear from the commissioners. I know I have some thoughts at the end, but Commissioner.
So one, for the work of the ad hoc, thank you so much. I mean, you've really, I think, synthesized the issue down to kind of the big rocks that we, about how do we look at this problem and start to attack it. The one thing I'd either ask for feedback or throw out there is on the recommendation, to whom? Okay? Who are you making this recommendation to? Because, and I think you have to look at this in light of Grants Pass. I don't know what the expectation is. So for example, in SLO or, San Luis Obispo, that county decides and prioritizes probably different than potentially our county. And one of the arguments I made early on and behind, I think, really a focus to do this ad hoc was the cost of housing in our county is so prohibitive. If you look at the number of people who are leaving California now, it's higher than it's ever been. Because people who are working and have incomes and are college educated cannot afford to buy a home here. So the question for me is, it goes back to something when Chairman Wagner was still chairing the committee, is what are the expectations for the community? What I would like some feedback is, who gets to decide what the housing's gonna look like? Is it the recipient of the person who's gonna potentially utilize the housing? Is it the community that sets the expectation of what we will provide as a basic necessity and nothing more? Is it this smaller housing? I apologize. Is it transitional? What is the term of that housing? How does it fit in to the model? Are we gonna say permanent supportive housing is absolutely what we're gonna do for every single person at the end of the day, and this is transitional housing? Because we can't necessarily afford permanent supportive housing for the entire population with wraparound services. So I guess the question for me is it's like question 0. Who are you formulating this policy for? Is it the recipient? Is it the community that's paying for it? What are the expectations for the community? What are the expectations for the recipients? And what standards are you going to set? Hey, this is the housing that's going to be provided. Basically, take it or leave it. And if you don't take it, there's consequences for not taking it. I mean, that's the difficult conversation, I think, a really hard one, because the only people that get to decide those questions, we can make recommendations, are the members of the Board of Supervisors for this county, or individual city council members in their city. That's why they're elected, because they get to set the parameters for their community. And at the end of the day, you know, a model, it's the policymakers that have to now, I think we should figure out what work should we do to take it to the door so that the policymakers can chew on it and then make decisions about what they want for their community. Because until you get them to give you direction, you don't know where this is going, how much money is going to be behind it. What are you going to build? Where are you going to build it? What zoning are you going to support? So I didn't mean to make it more complicated, because this is phenomenal work, but I've asked those questions because I don't know what the answers are for you.
So great question. Thank you for that, Commissioner. Before we open it up to others, so I think you've defined the mission of this commission, right? I mean, that is the purpose and the role of all of us here at this table, is to advise policymakers, not just at the Board of Supervisors, but all 34 cities in our county, to see if there are additional options that we can provide to the continuum of housing made available for folks who are struggling. Right now, we have very limited options. It's shelters, permanent supportive housing, and there's a vast delta between the two. So to the extent that we can fill those gaps, whether it's through, there's some home key programs that the state offers, there's motel vouchers, so there is a set and a palette of different things. But I think this is one that this commission, I think, did an incredible job taking a deep dive on. Specificity on numbers will be left to each body, whether it's a city council, whether it is the Board of Supervisors, because it does vary. And that's one of the benefits, and that's maybe one of the detriments, right? Because you can define the size of the unit, whether it has an indoor bathroom, an indoor kitchenette, or whether it's communal bathrooms and communal kitchen sites. But I think that's really the question that we are deliberating here, so we could present to the policy bodies that can study these. But we also want to be a functional commission where we're providing some expertise. We're taking a deeper dive because we took a year to do this work to make sure that we hand it off to a policymaking body and to see, is this an option? It shouldn't be to the detriment of permanent supportive housing, because that still is going to continue, and it's not to the exclusion of that, it's to complement that effort, right? Because we know it's going to take longer, it's going to be more expensive. What that number is, again, depends on the unit size, on a lot of things. I think one of the things I heard loud and clear, and I think, when we were talking about how we got here, was some of the comments that we were making, how expensive it was for a unit. And look, your children, just like mine, look, the choice is going to be whether or not they can afford to live in the county that they were raised in, right? But we're now serving a very vulnerable population that has very few choices. And so how can we provide a more efficient, effective way of transitioning them out of shelters? One of the things that we found is that we have so many, 3/4 of our folks in shelters are ready to leave. Like, they've completed their time, and they can transition to, I think what this would be is a transitional piece before they go into permanent supportive housing, and hopefully that pipeline gets better. But those are the things I think that we want to tee up here, and that's the role of these, what I consider all of you, subject matter experts in this area, because you will advise, again, city councils, the Board of Supervisors, to see if we want to venture down this path and say, if, and maybe Commissioner Bruno Nelson will remember, I know that when at Cal Optima, we had helped the city of Irvine with some funding for what they called a village of pods, which were another word for tiny homes. And they since ventured out and had to use the money for something else. But they were looking at it. So if we don't have a good model, or if we don't have good parameters, we don't study this, we can't see this as another option, another tool that we can provide a city or the county if it wants to provide this product, right? It's not something that I think is binding on anybody. It's just for us to be able to say, it shouldn't just be shelters or permanent supportive housing, because that is a very limited option of palettes, or a palette of options to have for folks who want to, for us to think about housing. So I think that's where we are right now, is having that discussion. And does it make sense, given the challenges that Doug outlined? But I think there's a net benefit knowing that this is one additional option that we can tackle. Look, permanent supportive housing has its own challenges as well. Cost, delay, shelters have their challenges. Folks don't like the fact that they have zero privacy and that they just don't feel safe in those settings. So what do we do with that question? That's what this commission is vested to do, which is ask those questions and then deliver that up. Because we shouldn't just be recommending it to ourselves or having the conversation. I think eventually it needs to be considered by a policymaking body like the board or other city councils.
Since we're talking about recommendations, do you mind if I work through the recommendations? Because this was a discussion, we anticipate and really appreciate that's going on, but I might have stopped short there. So maybe really reading out the recommendations of the group. So first, with the variety of models applied under the title Tiny Homes, it's recommended to use the term small-scale housing unit when referring to this category of housing. So that's number one. Number two, given the gamut of development options available, it is feasible to utilize different models for target applications such as emergency shelter, transitional housing, or permanent supportive housing. It's recommended to consider the type of shelter for each application. Excuse me one second. It is recommended to consider shelter for each application when implementing a small-scale housing unit strategy and incorporate best practices and guiding principles outlined in the pillar report for the application of the applicable pillar being considered. Number three is it's recommended to consider small-scale housing units when exploring housing funding opportunities. Number four is it's recommended to engage with local stakeholders, including potential residents, local officials, and advocacy groups during the planning and development process of a small-scale housing unit to foster acceptance. And then our last three, which are our last two that are more targeted. It's recommended to consider the small-scale housing unit type, whether it's emergency shelter, transitional housing, or permanent supportive housing, the size, the location, both capital funding, both capital and ongoing, available locations, and partnerships when determining the feasibility of a potential pilot program. And then lastly, it's recommended to direct the County of Orange to explore a small-scale housing pilot that would seek to potentially utilize new housing construction models, new financing strategies, and explore funding streams, all in support of increasing the viability of small-scale housing, small-scale infill development. Suggested parameters for a pilot would be split into two categories: permanent housing and temporary housing.
Commissioner Parks.
Yeah, I think Doug might have gotten to it, so thank you. And again, kudos to the ad hoc committee. So would it be fair for this group, a way to think about it, to recommend from coming up to the Board of Supervisors to allocate some amount of funding for SSHU, is that the new acronym, of small-scale housing units, and then we as a body help go out to the cities to share the work that's been done here and encourage them to maybe consider coming up with a pilot. I'm trying to think of what the next steps would be, and so maybe guidance on what that would look like would be helpful.
Yeah. So I think the recommendation 6 is pretty pointed, so that one is clear. I think sharing the report, because I think the report is really well done with all 34 cities in the county, to see the findings that the ad hoc and this, commission came up with respect to small-scale housing development would be really helpful. Again, I think the challenges, in addition to the ones that were listed, I think is just having a partner city that will say, we want to work with you as well. To the extent we can provide information, background, it makes that question easier because we have taken a deep dive, maybe deeper than some of the cities have been able to do. Again, the Torrance example is pretty fascinating to have it done right on their, City Hall campus. I don't know if that's possible. One of the things I've seen in other cities and in other states are some of these small-scale housing units developed on the campus of their congregate shelter. So for those that are sensitive, residents that may have families, may be elderly, may need that privacy more than others. That's where I've seen sort of the combination of having those, and sometimes they have a larger footprint, a parking lot where they can, stand those up. But I think that's where we're looking to you all for recommendations. I do think that, the 6 recommendations that were made, obviously the last one is really clear. What you mentioned, Sue, about sharing maybe this information with other partner cities, I think is an excellent recommendation. And I think coming from this commission, they see a lot of credibility that this commission has with trying to answer these questions, which is really, again, what we're vested to do. Commissioner Hurst.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. Salvation Army operates congregate shelters. We also operate small-scale housing shelter facilities in LA County, and of course develop permanent supportive housing. So we've got some insight into the benefits of each approach. I wanted to touch on the fact that there's a little bit of a misnomer, I think, out in the community that the facility cost drives the cost of caring for homeless. Our experience is the facility cost is only 35% of the overall cost structure of caring for homeless. So having that a part of the messaging to whoever we're talking about, that this does address an aspect of it, but it's a limited aspect of it. The presentation touched on that operational costs are actually a huge driver of considering any of this. And I think having that front and center in the discussion will make it more valuable. I would like to recommend, if we could attach with this study some sort of schematic on the land use needed for the projects, because in our experience, that usually drives a huge part of who opts to do what. For example, we know we can get 325-bed congregate shelter on 3 acres. In Anaheim, it's a very specific number. We know we can build 70 units of permanent supportive housing going 4 stories high with a wood frame on 6/10 of an acre. Those are very specific bandwidths. If we could get, some type of measurement to include in the recommendation that a city might be able to get a hold of, hey, we've got a fraction of an acre here. This might be a good candidate for this. It may capture their imagination some. Thank you.
Great comment. Thank you. Yes, Commissioner White.
So there's a lot to unpack out of all that. So let me try to get a couple of things. First of all, I think somewhat tangential to the housing itself, there was a lesson about congregate versus non-congregate shelters, even where they were in a congregate shelter and in the parking lot or surrounding facility, as you said, these small houses they would rather go live in, in relatively rough houses. That's important. We've talked about before about the trade-offs and what we will need. It also sort of points out, as we look at cold weather shelters, there's a couple of things that came to mind here. One is one of the reasons why we have people who are resistant to shelter is they don't like the congregate shelters. And so in cold weather, sometimes they're forced in, but then that's a temporary thing because, they don't want to be there. So we're just learning a little bit more about what makes them, and I think the safety and privacy are just huge factors in the shelters that we ought to recognize. I also think there's an opportunity as we look at cold weather shelters. Some of these units, as you said, can be set up in in relatively short periods of time, as you spread them across the county where you really do need to do cold weather, can we spread them out in such a way that there's, small numbers of units that can be managed by outreach teams and others ongoing, and set them up in times of cold weather where you actually can come in just like any other triage unit in an emergency, where you come in and set up, 5, 6 units in a location. And is that something in terms of cold weather situations where we could consider using units like this as a way to deal with cold weather and where the people are, right? Because it makes a big difference in where you put the cold weather. Right now, we try to group them, in 1 or 2 cities up in Central County, and that doesn't always work. So I think I think we've learned something out of this, kind of unrelated to ongoing things that we could use. I also think that ideally you said they're triage units, and one of the faults we often get as a country, even when we go in an emergency and we bring in triage teams, we do a terrific job of triage and then we leave before the problem is solved. And so here, these are good for a purpose. But we still have to deal with $700,000 unit housing, right? And we've used shelters and other things. We have to bring that cost of housing down to a number that's actually workable. Whether that number is 300 or 250 or whatever the number is, there's a housing cost and timeline that we're going to have to deal with. This doesn't actually solve that problem. We were going to have to deal with actual housing, right? I mean, ultimately. And maybe they're in here. We said shelters are good for 60 to 90 days max, and we're much longer. These are maybe good for 6 to 9 months max, probably. We should look at that. But ultimately, we're still going to have to find an outlet into real housing that fits in the community, that's affordable, that's working long term. And this can't, doing that, we can't let this distract us from solving the basic problem we have to solve, which is putting housing units that are affordable out there at a scale that can do that. And finally, we all brought up at the beginning, we need to start to prevent homelessness, because that's the other solution that drives this number down to where you don't need as much housing coming up. So this simply points out a tool we have in solving a problem, but it is not the solution to the problem. It's just another tool, and we need to work at it and use it that way. And I do think it brings a good tool, and I think the committee did a terrific job of gathering data. Finally, I don't think we need to pilot necessarily unless we're doing something different, dramatically different than what the units we went to see. Those people are pilots. I mean, we went to see pilots, if you will, where they have a longer term experience than we could get on a pilot, and they can tell you what the problems are and what the upsides are, and they already have. And so doing a pilot here, unless we're putting it into a situation that's dramatically different than we've saw it operate in, that we think we would have to pilot. I think if we want to know, we can go back to the places where they're operating these units and ask questions and learn from them far more than we could learn from a pilot at a much lower cost.
Thank you. And yeah, this is definitely not meant to supplant what we're doing or what we believe needs to continue on the permanent supportive housing side. It is more as a complement and not to the exclusion of that. So, Commissioner Twan? Yeah, that's right.
There's a lot here, and I don't think we can boil the ocean, right? So the idea of pilot, actually, I think I agree with, because the people that we need to win over are the sentiment of the community. They need to see something here in Orange County that works. And so I think there's an opportunity for us to refine this even further, to say, hey, let's find the right partners and the right funding partners in place. Let's pick one of them, right? That, whether it's focused on families or whatever the parameters are, but focus on something, build something that works, demonstrate that it could work. And then that's when other municipalities will come into play. Because I don't think we can just say, oh, we just need to build a bunch of housing, and you guys pick. It's just not going to go anywhere, I don't think. So essentially need to refine a little bit and just be a little more directive in saying, hey, these are the partners that are lined up. Here's a project, and we're going to prove that's going to work. The community's going to love it, and there's not going to affect them. And if we can prove that share that kind of sentiment across the board, then I think that we can create some traction to go forward.
Commissioner?
Thank you. I think the message is this is a pretty viable product that we should be implementing in more locations, and it's case by case what jurisdiction think makes sense for them. And I think for me, when I think about the pilot, which I think is a great idea, because there's no quicker way to go out of business than trying to innovate with construction. I mean, it's just really difficult. So to support that process, I think is extremely valuable. And collected data along with that. I think for me, I have two examples I throw out for a pilot in my mind. One is I was at a city council meeting last year, and the council there, working with the shelter provider, added, I think, 8 or 10 more beds to their congregate shelter. So a few more bunk beds. It was a positive meeting. It was very good. It just spoke to a successful program being expanded because of the results. And I would just say in that scenario, it'd be great to have someone raise their hand and say, you know, that report came out last year saying we should look at maybe using parking spaces and putting 4 to 8 of these standalone out in the parking lot there. And if that works for that site, that I think is something that they should consider if they can. And I think there's plenty of evidence that that's a good way to support evolving our emergency or transitional facilities. And I think in terms of permanent, you can think of a lot of the challenges of infill on a small scale, but if you're a faith community and you have a large parking lot that is rarely fully utilized, perhaps you'd like to have a portion of that parking lot put available for 5 to 10 units and be part of, and contribute your land to that. And right, I think so. Those are two examples in my mind of things they could throw out that I think are we might see happen if we just watch and wait and with this out there. And then I think going back to the cost conversation, and I hear all that. I think part of the challenge here is these really are, we didn't really see many products that were comparable to housing that a condo you'd buy or a rental home that you'd rent. These were all very much more temporary type structures with different profiles for maintenance. And once you include the land costs, the cost of fully connecting them, like any other building, the costs go up quite a bit. And so this is where I think you can over-focus on the cost ratio. This is not going to replace housing. This is another, I think that I like what the chair had said, another tool in the tool belt. I think this is a really valuable tool in the tool belt. I hope to see more of it. I think, and I'm really, and I'll just editorialize a little bit here. My whole career, when we talk about how shelters or interim facilities should work, you hear a lot of people saying things like, don't make it too comfortable. Should be a place people are too at home. Don't give them a bookshelf, like these kinds of conversations, because they're not going to go. And I just want you to know that the data is overwhelmingly showing in no uncertain terms that you give people a place where they can put on cover their eyes and put earplugs in their ear and just sack some Z's for 8 hours, that given that time, they're going to focus and listen to, the people around them. And so I think it goes back to what Commissioner Bruno Nelson had said about just being clear on what's the purpose of these facilities. Is it is it an emergency facility where people are coming in which case some of these spaces might have served a different purpose? Is it transitional where you're coming in the door and, hey, we're really focused on bridge housing, getting into housing, getting you linked? Or is it permanent where you're going to be there for many years and the facility should kind of have that level of quality and fit and finish? And so I just want to just kind of share my thoughts on what that could look like. But I think, again, my mind was changed by this process. My eyes have opened up, but I think this is a good direction to continue exploring.
Commissioner Bustamante-Pixa, and then Bruno Nelson.
This one, okay, thank you. I have just one comment and one question. I think somebody mentioned when we think about what populations, where do we start? I thought just something to throw out there is our recuperative care partners tell us that the largest group of unhoused people are older women. So when we may want to consider that there are many groups, subgroups of populations, but they are considered one of the most vulnerable populations out there. And then my second comment, I guess, question is, when you were doing the various site visits, did you learn about what is the shelf life for these small house units? So if we have a 6 to 9 month time frame for people to stay, what happens to the actual unit 6 to 9 months to a year later? Is there renovations to be done, or are they fit to serve?
Yeah, and obviously I'll open it up to the ad hoc members as well. We heard from each of the developers. It really, so it was model specific on what it looked like. The pallet homes, essentially what we heard from that developer and the folks utilizing that was if sort of like a piece broke, you'd essentially call in pallet shelter, they'd send a piece back. Some of the more permanent models hadn't been around long enough. That was sort of mentioning before that a lot of the groups mentioned, a lot of the developers mentioned how their product had a long shelf life. But when we talked to the operators, we heard a variety of different challenges of maintenance upkeep. And then the more unique product that you have, the fewer places you could go to fix it and the fewer experts in fixing it. Boss Homes, I think that Boss Homes uses, when they presented to us, they said they use a traditional building products. And one of the things they advertised why they use traditional building products was that if there were needed repairs, a common handyman, maintenance, common person can come in and fix it. With some of these very specialized products, now you have to go back to the manufacturer. It might take a little bit more time. So I know that a lot of the discussion here, we all want specifics and specific answers around cost, specific answers around maintenance. But I think what the group really saw was such a variety of applications that really, as we also look at sort of this recommendation that's in, recommendation 5 and 6, it's really about the right place, the right time, the right product. All those things need to be considered. And then I think as the group, I think that's when a group would feel more comfortable saying, okay, this is the path we're going to go. But speaking in generalities, especially when it comes to such a spectrum of different models, it's hard to give just the broad stroke of, yeah, thumbs up, let's move forward, or you know what, let's move on and think of something different.
Commissioner Bruno Nelson.
I very much like the idea that Supervisor Sarmiento that you shared with sharing this with cities and seeing what they think. And I don't want to make any more work for Doug or the ad hoc, but I want to make sure that we're cognizant of what it is we're recommending. And there's such a wide spectrum of what these small scale housing units can be. And at the center of that is how long someone will stay there. And it seems as if it could be helpful for us to even draw one line, to say for units that are for folks less than 6 months, this is what needs to be a part of that. For units that are more than 6 months, this is what we feel should be there. Because what we don't want is for our commission to make a recommendation and that to be misconstrued. That's something that's intended to be lived in for 90 days, that we are recommending someone to live there for 2 years. I would not want that to happen. So I think that there's a space for each of these. I don't think we have to be so specific as to the color of the walls and things of that nature, but if it's intended for a family, then maybe that could be something separate. It's just something to consider if we are to use the document. I think it's excellent to be able to use it. I would love to see it happen and for us to be able to share this with cities, but also to make sure that we're not accidentally recommending something that we don't, as a commission, feel is something that we would stand behind.
Excellent. Commissioner.
So when we were clearing the riverbed, Judge Carter was out there walking around telling us, tough shed, tough shed, tough shed. And he wanted to clear the riverbed, and basically he wanted us to buy thousands of tough sheds, if you all remember that. And at that time, we had no other housing. I mean, we started to build Kramer Place, or maybe Kramer Place was built at that time, but I really appreciate your comments, and in a perfect world, I think you're absolutely right. I've just been around government too long, and that's not the way government works. Government will look for a short-term solution, and if it thinks it solves that problem, it will say, okay, we're done, because we have 20 other things we got to resolve, and we're trying to work in a world with very limited resources. So what, I don't know how to frame that issue for the policymaker, because some people will interpret these small-scale housing to satisfy the non-building of permanent supportive housing. I think people will naturally look at that and just say, we've solved this issue. We've moved people off the street. It's better than what they had before. They should appreciate it, and we're done. And we don't, because if you think about the problems we've had, especially with South County, we haven't had the same kind of response from South Orange County that we've had from Middle and North Orange County spas. And so I think there will be people who do that. So I think you're right. I think we should frame it that way, because the commission has a responsibility to do that, ideally, if that's the consensus and the majority of this group. I have another question. I don't understand 6. What do you mean split into 2 categories? What is the thought behind doing, what is that recommendation and why?
I have a thought on it, and I'll provide that, but it's the ad hoc's recommendation. I just want to be really clear. It's not necessarily my recommendation. From my understanding, and then I'll let the group speak if when we looked, as we mentioned in the report, as we looked at the different models, there were some models that were really applicable to emergency and transitional shelter, and then there was other models, less of them, that were trying to be a permanent housing model. So I think the group was really interested in potentially exploring the applicability of both of them, seeing that there's, especially on the permanent housing side, where the discussion here at this commission originated was on the permanent housing side. As we've gone over here in today's meeting, that we saw the cost of traditional affordable housing rise. Is there an alternative? So I think that's where I take it away. And I think, yet again, it's a little bit to what Commissioner Bruno Nelson mentioned, really trying to provide some clarity that there is variation in small-scale housing units. So we want to be careful to say exactly what she just said, that we're either looking at a temporary solution or a permanent housing solution.
Then the one thing I just throw out there, Mr. Chairman, conversation and potential additional recommendation is, at the time that this is being considered by, right, the entity you're recommending this to, a policymaking board, they should be required to adopt a set of principles that support this policy decision. In other words, we're going to do the pilot because we believe in the following. And you use these guideposts that you've already drafted. How long it should be, what the cost should be, what the maintenance, what its purpose is. Because I think by us adding that as a recommendation, that you have to go through these policy considerations so that everybody understands how you're framing this decision to move forward with the pilot. So that it's not misconstrued that if you are going to move in this direction, that it is a permanent solution, that it's how it fits in to the scenario or the spectrum of all housing from start to finish. I think I'm just trying to split hairs with what Commissioner Bruno Nelson is saying. And having sat as one of those people on these boards and commissions for so long, having to vote and give direction to staff, I think that would be helpful, that when the decision makers are deciding how they're going to prioritize, they're telling everybody how they're putting that into a set of policy considerations and how they're balancing safety versus cost, privacy versus efficacy, right? And that would be, I'd ask we discuss that a little bit as an additional recommendation.
Agreed. I think the more specific recommendations we can make based upon the findings that the ad hoc has made and what the policy document seems to be referencing, I think there's a reason why they're in there, because they are still outstanding questions that that they see need a little bit more discussion. But I think that's the whole reason why we're doing this. But I think they're excellent suggestions by everybody that spoke and so forth. Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you. I think I would appreciate a little bit more direction, a little bit more of that detail that Commissioner Spitzer speaks of, because as I read this, I'm perplexed at what is really being recommended here. First of all, recommendation 5, consider the small-scale housing unit type, et cetera, when determining the feasibility of potential pilot programs. Okay. Consider small scale for, and then we get 6, which is explore another pilot program. Are those kind of the same recommendations dressed up differently, or are they going in different directions? Because then when I parse through 6, it's explore a pilot program that would potentially kind of undoes everything that comes later. It's mere suggestions, which is why the idea of more discrete policy findings is good. Do we potentially consider these things, the construction models, the financing, et cetera, in support of increasing the viability of small-scale infill developments? So is this a pilot to understand maybe small-scale houses so that they will be more viable in infill developments, or are we supposed to go put one in an infill development and see if it works? It's a lot of fuzzy language that, as a policymaker, I don't know that I can distinguish 5 from 6, much less then grasp, okay, what am I supposed to do here? All of which begs the question of cost. How much is my pilot? Well, if my pilot is to study all of those things in 6, I can do that relatively cheaply. If it's to build a small-scale infill development and say, see, this works, I got a whole bunch of additional costs. And then even if I say, see, this works, what do I do next year? Is it now up to me to build 10 more of these because they work? Or is it up to us to get this other jurisdictions to build them because they work? Or are we just supposed to say, you know, that's a good idea. Now what else can we do out there? I don't see it baked. I don't see it baked. The specificity that Commissioner Spitzer suggests, I think, is critical for any next steps.
Yes, Commissioner Hurst, and then Cunningham.
I appreciate all these comments. One of the things that does concern me is it seems like if we do the pilot, which in general I'm for, just for the record, it sets that group of residents up for the same problem we have existing in our shelters. There's no exit strategy out. So I think Commissioner Bruno Nelson was touching on this maybe. What are we proposing is the nature of what these are, because right now our congregate shelters are 97% full, and there's no exit out robustly. That will be the same story for these small-scale housing units. So you almost have to have an assumption they're going to be there for quite some time, because operationally, unless there's a housing pathway they're going to have access to that shelter residents don't, and I highly doubt that's the case, they're going to be stuck there as well, just as a note.
Commissioner Cunningham.
Thank you. There's a lot that I'm going to try to get out here. I think my fellow commissioners on the ad hoc committee know how important it is to me, number 6, because if we're going to go through the process of trying to work through all of the details that we have over the last year, we need to do something with that information. And I think it's important that our community do a pilot project in each spa. That is my recommendation as Gina at Home Aid. Because of the role that I play in our county, I do work with a lot of cities. I do know that there are cities that might be interested in working with the county and other collaborative partners on doing something like this. I also feel it's incredibly important, going back to what Commissioner Davis and Bruno Nelson said, that we really, what are we recommending? And what is the length of stay? What is the product? Who is this for? And there's a lot for us to consider before we go out and try to make those recommendations to other cities. I'm probably losing my thought process here. But there's a lot of people that can come together. Home Aid is a nonprofit that collaborates with a lot of people. And I know that if we come together, even with a recommendation, Chairman, to the Board of Supervisors, that my recommendation would be that the county, cities, other funders, people work together to go, how can we make this happen to see, will this work in our community? Will it help our residents in these cities see that we are helping to get folks off the streets and into a more safe and dignified living environment while we're building permanent supportive housing? So I can tell you, as any city that I've talked to about potentially doing something on this scale, I always add, that does not stop you from also building permanent supportive housing, because that is clearly what we need, but we need to get people in a different environment while we're doing that. So I don't know if I got all my thoughts out correctly, but number 6 is incredibly important to me. Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner.
Try to be quick. I want to respond to something Commissioner Spitzer and then Commissioner Hirsch said. So Commissioner Spitzer has commented on South County's lack of shelters, and I think Commissioner Hirsch hit it right on the head. They said, before I build a shelter, what's the exit strategy? And they go, well, there's no exit strategy. And they go, okay, so just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger as we get homeless because we don't have any way out. You'll get the same pushback as you should. And these, if you tell them, try these out, build these small houses temporarily, but we have no exit strategy. You have to have an exit strategy, or you don't, or you admit that you don't have, that they're permanent, right? So the you know, as you look at the cities taking these roles on, that's a big decision, right? Because if you basically say, you know, take this on and do this, but we don't know what's going to happen, and they said the same thing that my neighbor here said. Government says, okay, I got it fixed. It's good enough. Nobody's complaining right now, so I'm going to forget about it and move on to my next problem, and therefore this temporary thing become permanent. And so you rightfully get pushed back if that's the situation you put these communities in. I think we need to have a bigger plan if we want these to succeed.
Great, thank you for that. So let me go ahead and go ahead, because this is a receive and file item. But I did want to make sure that we incorporate everybody's comments and remarks. I think they were excellent. That's the purpose of this commission, is for us to have these discussions that are sometimes maybe opinions or maybe at odds as to next steps. I do think we wanted to make sure we bring it back here because a lot of the comments I heard, and I really appreciated yours, Commissioner Bustamante, just talking about what's the lifespan of these, of these units. And again, to Commissioner Bruno Nelson's, can we give direction on what is the, the length of stay, right? Those are things I think that have to accompany any sort of direction that we try to provide. It's imperfect because the length of stay for an emergency or for a congregate shelter has been exceeded by quite a bit, right? So we may place these, recommendations on there, but they are going to be exceeded just logically thinking this out, because we can't produce enough permanent supportive units to address, those thresholds that we'd like to meet. I do think that we should bring it back to this commission with some more specificity, because I think that recommendation number 6 is important. And to the vice chair's point, I do see that when you're successful on a pilot, that's when you get success from other jurisdictions to do the same. They want to see something rolled out well. Once they see it done well and successfully, people start buying in because they realize maybe there's a more efficient or cost-effective way to address this problem. What I do want us to think about is that we're all talking about, bureaucracy and how the government operates. Well, look, we should take a cue from the private sector. The private sector adjusts and adapts. And if we're seeing that we're having a bottleneck from our shelters and getting them into permanent supportive housing, well, maybe we're missing a piece. And that's what this was supposed to address, right? Is to see how we can make this more efficient. We shouldn't push one bottleneck from the shelters to another bottleneck on these small-scale units. But we should see that it's a continuum, that hopefully we continue to produce the permanent supportive units that will increase the flow and decrease the length of stay at every stage, right? So that's really the hope and the goal. I just want to make sure that we are meeting our mission, what the residents of the county expect of us, is to come up with solutions. We can kill every idea that comes before us, and then we're back to where we started, and they're going to say, well, why are you meeting so often without providing any guidance, any advice, any thoughts? Because, look, we're never going to get anything that's completely perfect, but we have to roll things out because we know what we have now is an imperfect solution. And so we need to make strides towards improving our system. I think, the county's done incredible work, but we do realize that there is room for improvement. And this is one of those steps that I think this commission could recommend, not just to all 34 cities, but to the county as well, so we can work in tandem with our partners in the cities. So you had something.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. It sort of hits to where you were going. So thinking about next steps and incorporating what I heard. So please correct me if I'm wrong. So I just want to mention a few things. One of the goals, the sort of primary goal of the ad hoc, was really to go out there and understand tiny homes or small-scale housing units and get a sense of if they're viable. And I think what I hear from the ad hoc is in the right situation with the stars lining up, we think that there are scenarios where it's viable. So I want to recognize that because that's sort of step one. I think what I'm hearing also from the chairman and from the group as a whole is the interest in potentially having the ad hoc come back and provide more specificity around number 6. And more specificity to, and this is where I think there is and was some challenge. As we know, when it comes to whether it's shelter or permanent housing, there are so many entities, the developer, the county, the city, the state, the community, different financing groups that come together. So I think there's sort of some challenge that the ad hoc had seen in how to present this particular recommendation. I think as staff, it was helpful to hear this conversation today is sort of the direction to bring together back the ad hoc to potentially come back with a more specific recommendation, and then the commission as a whole can weigh in on that when there's more specificity that was stated to be desired here.
Maybe we should check in with the ad hoc members. Are you all up to maybe reconvening with the idea of, obviously, we're not going to probably take any more tours of any sites. We have that end of it covered, but coming back and maybe addressing some of the questions that the full board or the full commission made. Commissioner Cunningham.
I for one am, but I would also like to maybe expand our committee to work on a little bit more of what Commissioner Bruno Nelson and Commissioner Davis were talking about is length of stay and who should this be for. And let's add that into our recommendations.
Standards cost. Commissioner Morrison, then Pineman.
I'm perfectly willing to come back. I want to see this to the end.
Your thoughtful comments are well received, and it sounds, it'd be fun to go back and just really try and nail this down. I just want to observe why a pilot, another word might be to workshop it in a practical context where people are trying to solve a specific problem and seeing what the constraints are in the existing regulatory or private financing markets, like whatever's the barriers. And I would just note, in terms of what we saw, I did review the County of Orange standards of care for shelters prior to doing these walkthroughs, and I'm familiar with different building standards. And I'll just note, I really think everything I saw from the shelter perspective complied with all the requirements of the County of Orange. One place I found, because I didn't ask the question or I didn't think to, was maybe laundry facilities, like really minor things. So it wasn't a big pivot from what's already being kind of put in place on that level. But I'll say on the permanent housing side, there is a pretty big variance between what is required or typically required versus what we saw. Not good or bad, but just noting that when you look at the different funding sources or approaches or what different cities require, that's not what we saw in the permanent spaces there. And so that to me triggers the question of, well, then it's not just a process where someone's going to do it. There's some sort of adjustment where we're intentionally trying to see, can the marketplace shift to allow for this different behavior, right? And so just those are my observations there. So anyway, I think going back and having a different, I'm looking forward to closing out this conversation next.
And the only thing I would add is that I think a good suggestion was made to maybe circulate the report to our 34 cities to make sure that once it's completed, once we've inserted some of the other additional comments that were made, maybe we reproduce a final product that we can circulate to everybody so they have that. And look, even our faith-based partners and, others that are in this space that can go ahead and, I believe, benefit from the information that this commission has made, and especially that the ad hoc has recommended. The one thing I would encourage those who had questions, specific comments, maybe reach Doug and his team and make those, with maybe specificity, and that way those can be included and the ad hoc can take those under consideration. But that said, I think this is a receive and file item, so we don't need to take any vote on that. Right? Do we have to have an action? Do we have an action item on that?
It is an action item.
Okay.
But
Well,
to receive and file, I guess what I'm hearing is that, if the group's ready for the receive and file.
let's go ahead and I guess I'll go ahead and move that this goes back to the ad hoc with some additional work for a final report to be circulated for the board, for the commission's consideration. Okay, great. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Any abstentions, remarks? Seeing none, okay, that carries. Let's go ahead and move along to the next item. Madam Clerk, if you'll please read that item.
Yes, so just for the record, item 2 was the presentation. Item 3 on the agenda was the actual action to receive and file. So the motion and second that was just made to apply it to item 3?
Yes.
Okay. So then the next item on the agenda is item 4, which is to approve the Commission to End Homelessness minutes from the August 21st, 2024 regular meeting. And we have no requests from the public to speak on this item.
Great. I'll go ahead and entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Second. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed, motion carries. And that concludes our items for today, but we'll move on to commissioner comments. And I do know, I know Commissioner Bruno Nelson has something for us to see. I'll have her tee it up, but are there any comments, any additional comments from the commission? Commissioner Morse? Any? Okay. So you just wanted to tee up?
Yeah, I just wanted to remind, you probably don't have to remind, but this is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Break out the purple.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Any other comments from the commissioners? Yes,
Quick
Commissioner
comment, I think. We comment a lot about we really have to break the back on how to get number of units increased quickly and inexpensively if we're going to actually deal with this problem. This committee has a lot of talent on it, this commission. I think that we could form an ad hoc committee here to begin to address how to bring permanent housing to the market and begin to brainstorm things and put together and bring reports and recommendations back to this commission ongoing to tackle that problem. That's the problem that we're still pushing down the road. And I think we pushed it about as far as we should push it. I'd just make a recommendation that we consider forming an ad hoc to do that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Seeing none, no other comments from the commissioners. I know Commissioner Bruno Nelson has reached out and is going to be teeing up a video on Cal Optima's naloxone distribution event. So thank you, Commissioner Bruno Nelson, for doing that. Let me go ahead and turn it over to you to see if you want to say any opening remarks before the video.
Thank you, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I promise this is only 3 minutes, but I do think it's very important information. Cal Optima Health, thank you, Supervisor, is having its next naloxone distribution event on October 11th. I want to say this is completely free to community-based organizations and health providers across the county. I have information here on that event on October 11th, how we can deliver that to your nonprofit if necessary, how you can come pick it up. I just want to say how important we think this is to get this out into the community. And this very short, I promise you, 3-minute video is just kind of showing you a little bit about that and how this works. I think it's just education we should all have. So with that.
Did you guys pay your bill?
Possibly not, right?
Well, you have all the money in the county, so.
If it's not working, I'm happy to send the link out. I don't want to make everyone wait. I'm happy to send the link to everyone or to staff. We can send it out.
Let's give it 30 seconds. Let's see if our
So while you're waiting, I was driving down the street and a woman was down on the ground, so I grabbed my naloxone and I administered it to her. And when the firefighters got there, he looks at me and I told him.
This video will show you how to give naloxone in an overdose situation. If someone won't wake up and you suspect an overdose, administer a first dose of naloxone and call 911 immediately and provide the address of your emergency. This is how to administer naloxone. Remove the medicine from its packaging. Tilt the person's head back and provide support under the neck with your hand. Hold the nasal spray with your thumb on the plunger. Gently insert the tip of the nozzle into either nostril. Press the plunger firmly to release the dose. Empty the entire container, then remove the nasal spray. Roll the person on their side. If possible, place their hands under their head and bend their upper leg forward. This is the recovery position. It keeps the person from rolling onto their stomach so they won't choke in case they vomit. Watch for signs of breathing. If the person is still not waking up, provide rescue breathing or CPR. Place the person on their back. Tilt their chin up and open the airway. Pinch their nose with one hand and give 2 breaths. Repeat. Give 1 breath every 5 seconds. Give chest compressions. If they regain consciousness, be aware that some people might wake up disoriented or agitated. Give them space. If they don't respond or wake up within 2 or 3 minutes, give additional doses of naloxone, switching between nostrils. It's safe to administer as much naloxone as necessary. If opioids are not involved with the overdose, naloxone will not cause any harm. Each nasal spray pump is for one use only. If a child may have been exposed to or possibly overdosed on opioids, it is okay to give them naloxone. It is not going to hurt them. The nasal spray is FDA approved to reverse opioid overdose in children, including newborns, infants, and toddlers. Stay with the child or person until emergency help arrives. Naloxone is not a substitute for medical care. The effects of naloxone are temporary and last only 30 minutes. There's still a danger of overdosing once the medicine wears off. This is why it's important you stay with the person until they go to the hospital. Recognizing the signs of an overdose is as easy as ABC. A. Awareness. A person experiencing an overdose will have trouble walking and talking. They look dazed, drowsy, confused, or unconscious. B. Breathing. Breathing is slow or absent. They are choking, snoring, or making gurgling sounds. C. Color. Opioids can deprive your body of oxygen. Their skin feels cold or clammy. Their lips, skin, or fingertips are pale, ashen, purple, or blue. Once you recognize the signs of an opioid overdose, it's time to act. Never hesitate. California law protects a person who is overdosing and the person helping from legal trouble. If you or someone you know is struggling with an opioid addiction, help is available from CalOptima Health. Visit our website at caloptima.org or call customer service at 1-888-587-8088. There are several factors that can increase a person's risk of overdosing: taking too many painkillers, mixing painkillers with alcohol or other drugs, taking illegal or street drugs laced with dangerous substances, a change in your tolerance level. Preventing overdose deaths starts with all of us. For more information on prevention and treatment programs, call the National Crisis Hotline at 988. You can also call 211 Orange County by dialing 211 or OC Links at 855-625-4657. These resources are confidential and available 24 hours per day. Remember, this spray can save a life. Thank you for being a CalOptima Health member.
All right, let's give our IT guy a big round of
Yeah.
applause. In any event, thank you, Commissioner Bruno Nelson, for that. That concludes our meeting on the Commission to End Homelessness. Our next regularly scheduled meeting will be held on Wednesday, December 11th at 1 p.m. in this room. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.